All right. Everybody can see this, I hope. Assume everybody can see this. So we're gonna begin with the problem that we're really trying to solve. And these days, the ability to create meaningful connections with people in real life is very limited for all the reasons we know. On the other hand, people are spending more time online. But given the tremendous amount of competition for attention, it's more important than ever that we really ground ourselves in the fundamentals. So, does your brand instantly connect on an emotional level with your audience? Is it consistently expressed in every aspect of your customer experience? Is it a runway for growth? And these might look like separate questions, even questions that belong to different departments, but they're not really, because there's one question that's at the root of all of them, which is simply, who are you at your best? Once you answer that, the rest of the answers come pretty naturally. And that's the power of archetypes. Over the past 20 plus years, we've used every different model and framework. We've read every book by every guru. We've built strategies with boxes and Venn diagrams and pyramids and keys. But the thing is that they always feel disjointed. They always feel like you're bolting things together and it's not integrated. Moreover, a lot of the time they're long on what you should say, but not necessarily what you should do. And when you can decode your archetype, it doesn't just create an immediately recognizable and emotionally powerful identity. It informs every element of your customer experience. And this is why we tend to say that an archetype really is a blueprint for growth. But I want to take a step back in terms of what are archetypes and why do they work? To answer that, we need to go way back. So on the plains of the Serengeti, if our ancestors could not recognize or differentiate the shape as well as the intent of that lion among the grass, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. This is why what behavioral economists call our system one brain has evolved to instantly calculate two things. One, is this a pattern I recognize? Two, can I trust it? And not much has changed, really. It's still a jungle out there, so to speak, but these days, instead of using our system one brain to survive lions, we use it to survive advertising. And don't get us wrong, the system two brain is excellent and important. It's deliberate, it's rational, it makes better decisions, but it doesn't really help us survive lions. It's slow. And system one, by contrast, is instant and instinctive. It screens out what is important to pay attention to and not. And to do this, it's using rules of thumb, not careful analysis. And it's driving the bus. System one makes about 95% of our decisions, and it has to, because it's estimated that we make 35,000 decisions a day. People might have heard it takes just 7 seconds to make a first impression. In fact, it's probably less. That's system one at work, which also means by the time you're done listing all those wonderful rational reasons to buy your product, your audience has long since made up their mind about you, about whether you're competent, likable, and most of all, trustworthy. So how do you bypass system two and speak directly to the system one brain? Well, spoiler, you kind of already know this is about archetypes. So some people, the tricky thing here is what level of knowledge people have of archetypes, but some people might be familiar. They might have seen it in psych class. They might have actually used them in some way, shape, or form as part of brand development. Now, according to the father of archetypes, Carl Jung, archetypes are universal roles or characters that reside in what he called the collective subconscious. We define them a little bit differently. We say that archetypes are iconic identities that embody the ideal set of traits and temperaments to perform a given role or job, so to speak, in our society. And so what matters is not whether there is such a thing as a collective unconscious. The point is that these are models of the ideal characteristics to do a given role or job. And where did we learn about these characteristics, the traits and temperaments required to perform a given role or a job in our society? From storytelling. We tend to associate storytelling with entertainment, but there's a reason why the ability to create and understand fiction is one of the most telling features of the human brain, because it's the most powerful tool for learning ever invented. I don't know if anyone's ever read Sapiens, but some great stuff in there on storytelling as the defining human trait. And stories, especially in their most elemental form, we're talking myth, fairy tale, folklore, are there not just to entertain, but to teach us things about who we are as people, cultural norms, values, and social roles that guide our behavior. What is expected, what is permitted and not, from whom, under what circumstances, and why. And when you look across myths and fairy tales from different eras on different continents among groups who had little to no contact with each other, there is a fairly consistent set of characters. There's not one definitive list, but there certainly are patterns. And many are familiar with the Greek pantheon of gods, Zeus, Apollo, and the like. But these personas existed long beforehand. They go back to ancient Greece, and even before that into ancient Mesopotamia. They also existed further forward and across continents in terms of China, India, and Native America. And again, there is this familiar cast. And the reason is that we're all human. We all share the same needs, fears, strengths, and weaknesses. And we still see this today because they keep getting reinvented. And our most popular films and our most transcendent personalities, Disney films in general, Star Wars is well known for their adherence to archetypal characters and their stories. And if there are some fans of The Last Dance out there, I'm a big fan. These guys are archetypes to the max. I mean, Jordan is the warrior and Pippin is the friend, Rodman is the rebel, even Phil Jackson is the sage. So the reason why that documentary, in my opinion, resonates so strongly is because these real life people conform to these archetypes so powerfully that we've gotten used to. It's almost part of our cultural programming. Now, the thing about these characters is that they're not just characters. To use more of a term from today, they're kind of like algorithms. The reason why we say that, or another term we use is a behavior code, is that there's a consistent set of traits, attributes, and beliefs that are ideally suited to fulfill a given purpose or role in the world. And the reason why they cut through that system too and nest so instinctively is because we keep reinforcing that through our storytelling. And this is why archetypes have this ability to be an ideal blueprint for a brand, affecting everything from new products you invent to the culture you foster. So this is an overview, and this will be familiar to some people who know archetypes. It's familiar yet a little bit different. And there isn't one definitive list of archetypes, but there is kind of a classic 12 that we've taken a few liberties with, and yet it's still intact. It's a little bit different the way some people organize archetypes. We've organized them a little bit differently. You can kind of see left to right as you see this screen. We really have three almost need state groupings. The far left-hand column is what we call the care archetypes. So those are the dreamer, the lover, the ally, which some people call the everyman or something like that, and the nurturer, which some people call the caregiver. So the thing about this group is that they are agreeable, they're social, they're cooperative in nature, they're responsible for building the very bonds of cooperation necessary to organize ourselves into productive social units. The second column, these are a little more task-oriented. If the first one's a little more people-oriented, this one's task-oriented. These are what we call the creator group, and the four associated are the wizard, the jester, the maker, and the thinker. And these people are really the builders of our society, quite literally in some cases. They're culture makers, knowledge providers, tool makers, and users. Today, we might call them part of the creative class. And they are really creating the scaffolding of our civilization. Then if you move to the far right, what you see is the conquer need state. And the four associated archetypes are the outlaw, the explorer, the fighter, and the chief. And whether it is to defend themselves from oppression, or to find and conquer new lands, or to conquer their own fears and weaknesses, or to defend the home and the tribe, these are there and because they won't shy away from a fight. And I like to think that if you basically have each one of these jobs represented, this is almost like the first organizational unit of a society. So it's easier to kind of look at a couple of examples. Hopefully our videos play, and we'll try this out and see if we can get this going.
I'd like to buy the world a home and furnish it with love. Grow apple trees and honey bees and snow white turtle doves. I'd like to teach the world to sing with me. I'd like to buy the world a home and keep it company.
I think you get the point. So I don't know about people on the line, but every time I hear that, my first response is kind of to grimace because it's so saccharine. But over time, the melody kind of gets me, and then I get singing along. And that ad is almost 50 years old at this point, and yet, if you take away the graininess, it's still so Coke, because Coke is the dreamer. That's the one up in the top left-hand corner. And we're going to show advertising and stuff, but that's just because that's what there's video of. But if you think about Coke and its super close affiliation, some would call it appropriation, of Santa Claus, to the Mean Joe Green ad, which I saw a couple days ago, to the Happiness Factory with its focus on optimism, to the activations they do, including the one, say, remember in Kashmir, where they brought together India and Pakistan together. The brand it so embodies innocence, wholesomeness, and idealism. And it's that the power comes from the level of consistency and commitment to be in the dreamer in all its forms. And you can compare that, for example, with Pepsi, who lots of people say have lost their way at a certain point, and maybe because they've lost their archetype, they tried to do their own Teach the World to Sing ad with Kylie Jenner and see how well that worked. And I would say that that's partly because that's just not who they are. So let's look at another example.
Dear Predictable, there's no other way to say this. It's over. I found a permanent escape from monotony. Someone who desires more than just beauty alone, who prefers elusive over usual, powerful over passive. Together we are perfectly balanced, our senses awake, our hearts racing as one. I know this is sudden, but you know what they say. If you love something, set it free. See you around, Julia.
So I don't know whether Alfa Romeo deliberately actually follows archetypes or knows about archetypes, but they could not be more the lover. In fact, I'd argue that they're a specific strain of the lover that we call the siren. And when you look at the bold red color, the passionate red color, to the naming architecture, I mean, let's start with the fact that the company's called Alfa Romeo. Even that nameplate is called the Julia. So, and you can also even feel everything about even the ad, like the way it's been personalized, and even that heart-pounding soundtrack that mimics the racing of your pulse. In every way, they just channel this lover, and it so makes Alfa Romeo stand out from everybody else. And there's still running footage. Everyone does running footage in cars, but the way that archetype kind of comes through makes it stand out so much. So we've kind of gone through just a really quick summary of the archetypes, but the thing is that as societies become more complex, I kind of talked about the first sort of almost village in a sense, but as our societies grow more complex, our roles more specialized, so have the archetypes. And so we've used archetypes in some way, shape, or form for years. One of the things that we found was that they can be vague, is you can kind of drive a truck through the interpretation. And so what we wanted to do was create something that's more precise, because it would be a better guide to developing a brand. The other thing is that in some cases, there is a dominant category archetype. And if you're a challenger, you need to find something distinctive to bring to the table. And yet that category archetype's there for a reason, is because they're really meeting those category needs. So we've noticed that a lot of strong brands today are a bit of a mashup. And like we always are looking for tension, and there can be a smart amount of tension that you find by bringing together elements of a couple of archetypes. Perhaps one is dominant and one supporting. So all that is why we are introducing sort of what our own language on this is. We call this sort of the 2.0 of archetypes, the avatars. And we've spent about 9 months working on this. So we've always worked on archetypes, but this is kind of a new system. And just the language on avatar is that it is common language used today to describe a persona, especially an online persona on social platforms. But it also, an avatar is a variant of something, which is what the avatars are, and we think it sounds cool. So this is the overview of all of the archetype families, we call them, is that you can think of each archetype as we go through. We just talked a little bit about the dreamer and the lover. I kind of mentioned that the siren might be the most applicable avatar to Alfa Romeo. But the thing is that these are different facets, and you can drill down on each one of these to find something specific and powerful. Now, we don't have time to go through all of them, and so what we're going to do is sort of case study one, but we are sort of working on our website that we'll have live soon that kind of drills down further, and we're creating other content. So for now, we're just going to kind of give one case study example. A couple things to keep in mind as we go through. One is we're not saying that the people who created these brands or manage these brands use archetypes. But they kind of are, because people gravitate naturally to these things. Also, the case studies we'll go through, we're looking at the dominant avatar, in that they might have a mix of a few things going, but we tried to identify their dominant one. So one thing we're going to do is we're going to go through the jester, because it's one of those ones where we run a lot of workshops where we actually use the archetypes, and nobody ever picks the jester, partly because it's kind of associated with the fool, but it is a very, very powerful archetype. And so we want to kind of explain how it works and drill down on it a little bit. One of the reasons why people don't gravitate to the jester is they just think it means funny. And people say, we're not a funny brand, but that doesn't mean you're not a jester. And also, just because you are funny doesn't make you a jester, because humor is one of the most powerful tools we have at our disposal to drive attention and likability. But there's more to it than that. The key is to look at their fundamental purpose and role in the world. And, when you look back at, through the centuries, again, whether you're looking at the Harlequin from medieval Europe, but it goes further back to the court in ancient China and Rome had a role like this. Even in Lakota culture in North America, there was something called the Hekoya, which was a similar role. And they are classically associated with the fool who entertained the king. But the thing about them is that underneath that silliness is this wicked intelligence and a freedom-loving anti-authoritarian streak. And the jester really is a creator. What they create is fun, bringing mirth to the mind, healing through laughter, helping us understand societal norms and challenging them when necessary, but always with a wink and a smile. So there's potentially a ton of power. And so we're going to go through some of these. The first one, as we say, is so inside the jester, the first avatar we would talk about is the entertainer. So we're going to start with a quote in the words of P.T. Barnum, as well as Freddie Mercury: "The show must go on." And the entertainer lives for the laugh, but ultimately they have a greater purpose: to give people a joyful diversion, even if only for a moment, from the grind of everyday life. So that joyful diversion is very important. So we're talking about the original minstrels, but today's class clown. And they do use humor. It's one of the clubs in their bag, and it also is good-natured because it's meant to heal, not hurt. And naturally, you can see how this avatar works for arts and entertainment. But what's really interesting is that a sense of humor and a skill with the crowd is a very powerful tool in any group setting or profession. And here would be an example.
You have a brilliant mind, and like many brilliant people, you don't necessarily think the rules apply to you.
was so much more convenient thinking of you as an idiot.
A little ice that just chipped off. If you want to be a clown, go join the circus.
For your own sake, I think you should just lay low for a while. The hospital will cover all of your bills. Any other questions?
So I hope that people are not upset by the Robin Williams thing. I think that I'm hoping enough time has gone by. It's just that that character is so emblematic, and we like to look at brands. We also like to look at these characters because a lot of that inspiration for brands comes from these characters. And obviously Patch Adams is a doctor, but there's lots of doctors out there. And I don't know if some people know, but people probably are familiar with the film, but Patch Adams was a real guy. And really what made him so special was that he was an entertainer in nature. And that's really what gives him his power. And so when we look at, so what we do is we create, what we've done for all of the avatars is create what we call a behavior code. So what you see here is just a quick summary. We actually go through a lot of detail with some of the other materials that we have. We talk about the purpose, the enemy, the skills and traits, the jobs to be done, their essence, even their weaknesses and shadow. We don't have time to go through all that, but that all exists. And the reason why we did that is because we wanted to put a lot of rigor towards making sure that we're not just looking at the archetypes and the avatars because they seem kind of fun. It's because they actually, they're a decision-making tool, which helps sort of provide this platform to be able to know what kind of behaviors and actions to exhibit. So like we say with this one, the purpose is to be a joyful diversion from the everyday. So to think about how a brand can actually be that joyful diversion, that's what makes you an entertainer. The traits and the skills are they're talented, positive, playful, lighthearted. And we say that there's an essence to them, which really is about escapist fun. So you'll see as we go through the avatars that with the jester, it's always about fun, but there's different types of fun. And that's why I understand there's different types of fun. If you talk to comedians, there's different types of funny. So there are different types of jesters. So when we think of brands, certainly one of the really best known is M&M's, and lots of people who kind of go through archetype stuff will see M&M's represented. And M&M's is special because it's actually part of the Mars group. And to my understanding, Mars actually follows an archetype methodology, at least they used to. So that's why they kind of fit in that. And what you'll find is in this category, you find a lot of sort of snack foods, because that's what snack foods are, is they are a temporary diversion from the everyday. But these days, our temporary diversions tend to happen more so on a screen. And so what you see there is Spotify. I mean, TikTok, it's hard to beat. I always think about working on candy bars in the past. There was a need state that went with candy bars that we called mindless munching. And certainly TikTok is kind of a digital equivalent of mindless munching. The key to these brands is this ability to create this entertaining escape. And so to be an antidote to both the craziness of what's going on around us today, as well as just the drudgery of everyday life. And that's why they are kind of today's P.T. Barnum. And it's important to think about that it's not about the tech. So we've got a couple examples there that are from tech, but the tech is the enabler. The important thing is the purpose. So the second one we want to talk about is the instigator. And we'll just go right to our example here. Oh, sorry, not to the example. So we'll go to this.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I please have your attention? I've just been handed an urgent and horrifying news story. And I need all of you to stop what you're doing and listen. Cannonball!
So as you can see there, it's a pretty big difference between Patch Adams and, we're not saying Ron Burgundy overall, but that moment of Ron Burgundy is so perfect because the instigator brings the party. While most of us hang back and wait to see how others behave, the instigator has got this madcapness to them, but they also have a lot of courage because you gotta have a lot of courage to follow your instincts. And even if those instincts are to be the first into the pool, these guys are the mischief makers, but they're good-natured mischief makers. So they live in the moment, they enable excitement and fun, and they bring it out in others. So there's a really proactive nature to being the instigator. So I also always like to think of Bart Simpson as that ideal version of the instigator. So the behavior code again, is different. It's not that joyful diversion. It's a spark that lights the fun. So really I always like to talk about the enemy here is boredom, the skills and traits. So these are similar, but they still have their own differences in terms of being spontaneous, mischievous, exciting, effervescent. And so again, the essence is fun, but it's this mischievous fun. So when we think about brands, a lot of brands that perform here are they're teenagers, they're for teenagers, or they're for young adults. Because they respond to that kind of sense of mischief. I mean, it's a good thing to be able to compare, say, Cheetos to M&Ms, right? M&Ms has a childlike quality and it's cute. Cheetos, it has a little bit of dangerousness, a little bit of coolness. So it feels a little bit more teen oriented in nature. I'm a big fan of place branding, and Las Vegas is such a perfect instigator. They even had a campaign a few years ago about the enablers, and the whole thing was about that person. Everybody has that person in their life that gets them into trouble, and that's kind of what Vegas does, and that's what the instigator does. And then there's hotels.com is something that we have worked on. We're just going to show sort of an example here.
One way to get through a tough Canadian winter is with a shovel. Another way is with the hotels.com winter swear jar. We added a quarter to the jar every time a Canadian cursed about winter on Twitter. Like when @FryerDryer said, "For f***'s sake, I'm so done with this winter. My nipples have been rock hard for weeks." Or when @MissUptownUptown said, "I think I broke my back shoveling. F*** you, winter. F*** you, Canada. F*** you, everything." How did it work? Our team of computer whizzes developed a social listening tool that scanned millions of tweets for angry winter word combinations like, "It's f***ing freezing," or "This winter is absolute dog shit." Think of it as a profanity filter in reverse. So every time a Canadian cursed about winter, we were able to send back a personalized response with a URL that directed them to our website. Once there, they got to see a shiny quarter added to the pile. Each time the jar reached $1,000, Hotels.com sent one freezing f***ing cold Canadian who was abso-f***ing-lutely sick of f***ing winter somewhere really f***ing warm.
All right, I feel like I should have warned the room that there was going to be a lot of swearing in there, so hopefully everybody's okay with that. So this is a brand that we've worked on, and when Hotels.com was brought to Canada, we inherited the mnemonic device, the brilliant mnemonic device, which is Captain Obvious. But he's always been a little bit one note. He's essentially the punchline of a joke. People have a bad vacation experience. Captain Obvious points out the obvious and then explains some feature or benefit of Hotels.com. So when the client came to us, they wanted us to make Hotels.com relevant to Canada, but at the same time, they also felt like there was almost a gimmick that was getting stale, and they were actually thinking about getting rid of them altogether. So what we thought was this, I mean, everybody knows that you really can't dismiss a powerful mnemonic lightly because it's part of the name of the game. And so what we thought is he just needs to become more proactive. Instead of being a passive observer making these fun quips, he needs to become, like I say, proactive. He needs to be ignite the fun, so to speak, which is why the instigator is such a natural fit. So whether it was our approach to loyalty or promoting long weekends, it was about really making him the enabler of the fun in a relevant Canadian way. It also brings up another point just for people out there, just because most people on the phone are in Canada, and a lot of the time Canadian companies inherit a brand strategy from global. And the thing is, though, that we need to activate it. And by homing in on your archetype, it helps create that blueprint for behavior. It opens up new ways to interpret and apply the brand while staying true to its roots. So the last is the provocateur. And our quote here is from Simon Wiesenthal. Nazi hunters are not exactly known for their sense of humor, but this quote is just too perfect and speaks to the depth of the gesture. Humor is the weapon of unarmed people. It helps people who are oppressed to smile at the situation that pains them. So an example here is right here.
That is infuriating. After all, if I wanted exorbitant fees that keep getting raised all the time despite shitty service, I'd become a customer of AT&T. Yeah. Fuck you, AT&T. Even if you take over, you'll never be my real...
Dad, He actually says real dad. We cut off the clip before it actually got to dad. So not sure how many John Oliver fans there are out there. I think he's a truly unique comedian. I always refer to him as sort of an activist entertainer because he marries real world initiatives and activism with his political commentary. The reason I like to show the AT&T clip is that AT&T is the parent company who owns HBO, who runs John Oliver's show, and yet almost every show he takes some sort of swipe at AT&T because that's what the provocateur does. The provocateur is they stir the pot, but their higher purpose is really truth itself. And humor is just the way in. So they really have ruthless insight into the human condition and the ills of society, but they really are a prankster. And their humor is aimed at authority. Now, that authority can be bigger social political authority, but in the case of brands, it's more aimed at a dominant category player. So if you're a challenger brand, the provocateur can be very powerful, but by the same token, it's a risky approach. You got to be comfortable with really walking that line. But the thing is that if you can get it right, their ability to mask a substantial message under a good-natured wink and a smile can be very powerful. So when we look at the behavior code there, the purpose is to enlighten and challenge authority. Really, this goes back to the original Jester, because the original Jester, one part of their thing was they were the only people who were permitted to speak truth to power. So this is a potentially very powerful avatar. And in terms of the traits, you can see the intelligence that's built in: witty, insightful, provocative, satirical. So sometimes people say, oh, if we're smart or intelligent, well, then that's going to take you towards the archetype that's called the thinker or the sage. But there's intelligence really in all of these. It's just how it's actually used. And when, again, with the essence, it's fun, but there's some subversiveness there, and that can be really great, but it can be a challenge. And when you look at the brands that live here, some of the really the most powerful brands live in this space. One example is Virgin. I mean, just look at their name. It's provocative in its own right. And certainly if you go back to their genesis, especially Virgin Atlantic, they did such a great job of using British Airlines as a foil. And they would take a lot of shots because British Airlines was the biggest, and they're also sort of stuffy and traditional. You can look at Newcastle Brown basically following the same playbook, except they took shots at Stella Artois. And of course, the king, so to speak, of the prank really is Burger King. And whether it's Whopper Freakout, Mick Whopper, Whopper Detour, even their surprisingly substantial take on net neutrality, Burger King is one of the most awarded brands because they've really mastered that art of the prank. And that prank could be aimed at their rival. It could be aimed at themselves. It could be aimed at their consumers. So potentially a lot of power there, but you're always sort of straddling that line. So that's just a quick case study. And of course, we have a lot more detail on these, but we just wanted to show that case study as evidence of being able to take archetype and then drilling deeper to understand its different dimensions. Our plan is to follow up with additional content that goes deeper on all of these. This is just to show an example today. But we're going to switch gears because really it still comes back to the three questions that we talked about at the beginning, which is, does your brand instantly connect on an emotional level with your audience? Is it consistently expressed in every aspect of your customer experience? And is it a runway for innovation? And you can see that when you really commit to the right archetype and avatar, it's more than personality. It really can be a blueprint for growth because it's a blueprint for behavior. And that behavior can affect CSR, innovation, comms, and really the overall customer experience. So we've been short on process. We're going to continue to be short on process. We don't want to get all selly on everybody. We're going to have follow-up where we kind of drill deeper on how we're actually dialing into the archetypes and avatars. But just a few quick notes on this is, naturally, when you look at the grid with all the archetypes and the avatars, you can kind of eyeball it and take a stab, but you still need to follow a disciplined planning process. And part of that is because it might not be just a matter of picking the category archetype. It's finding out what is in your DNA, how that relates to the emerging needs and the category drivers overall. So that's why we say that we go through a process, which is the first stage is what we call decode. So category drivers, emerging needs, which might be some competitive white space, and your brand DNA. So once we kind of decode that through a series of exercises and meetings, then we're in position to create that blueprint. And the blueprint really is composed of what we call the brand code, the brand creed, and the brand book. Don't have a lot of time to get into the details, but it's really about telling a holistic narrative story as opposed to just having a bunch of boxes and pyramid type things. So then once you get the blueprint, then it's very important to then, as we say, encode it. Because what you want to do is that has to now go into everything that you manifest your brand through. Of course, identity is the place to start, but content, innovation, culture, all those sorts of things, anything that goes into the go-to-market plan is what you want to do. So along the way, of course, we don't want to lose track of the classic sort of strategic metrics. So of course, you need to be meaningful to needs. You need to be different from what other people are saying, but you also need to be something else that maybe sometimes doesn't get enough credit and is maybe the most important, which is you need to be authentic. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that if you're not authentic, your consumer can sniff it out. There are just too many ways to research a company these days to find out if they walk the talk. Two is authenticity for us is really the only sustainable model for development over time. Why? Because it's true. You know it, your people know it. Any brand can fake it, but not for long. But it's not just about discovering who you are. As we said at the beginning, it's about discovering who you are at your best, because this is what people really do buy. Not what you do or even why. To apologize to the Sinek fans out there, it's about who. Who anchors everything, and it needs to be true. The good news is that your archetype already exists. It's in your origin story, it's in your best performing products, and most of all, it's in your culture. That's why we say that we don't invent anything, we just decode it. So that's kind of